everyone. My name is Chris Wired, and this is my good friend.
Hi, I'm Jacob.
Welcome to another episode of Chris's Classic Cinema. So last week we were talking about disaster films, but now it's Halloween time. So we are going to be dealing with 4 movies that deal with the same topic. I'm talking about robots.
Yes, and this week I'm going to be in the driver's seat. Walking you through the stuff instead of you walking me through everything.
This is going to be great.
It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the 4 movies that we saw, they are from different eras of cinema, and they are really interesting in their concepts.
They're all as polarizing as it gets. They're all about historic as they get. They all have something really big.
And some of them have robots that are still to this day some of the most iconic in pop culture, minus the one in Star Wars.
Minus the one in Star Wars, minus Terminator, minus Daryl, minus all of those guys. We skipped through most of the ones. We're talking about movies that are going to be more in that are not just popular, but are not as often talked about in some cases.
That I can agree with, especially with the first one we're going with, because my God, the first one we saw, I was spellbound.
Yes, and what he's referring to is, of course, Metropolis, 1927 silent film.
Directed by Fritz Lang.
Mm-hmm. The very first silent film we've ever reviewed, and also the oldest film, 1927, filmed in Germany.
The oldest one so far.
Yeah, oldest one so far. Filmed in Germany, taking place in the distant future, early 23rd century, and a dystopian city.
In the distant future, the son of a socialite finds himself falling in love with a worker's daughter. Unfortunately, they're apart because of the extreme social classes between them. And next thing you know, there's this evil scientist that ends up wanting to make a robot to destroy everything that the socialite has.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that sums up everything pretty well there. Of course, he does so through a robotic mechanical machine known as Maria. That is the name of the robot. It's also named after the dead wife of the socialite as well.
No, the woman was named Hell.
Hell.
Maria is the name of the woman who was used for the image.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, this film was directed by Fritz Lang. He was known for making a lot of big movies back in Germany's time. One of his most iconic was released a few years later, the movie M, starring Peter Lorre, and is considered one of the most influential films of the 1930s.
Mm-hmm. Do you want me to keep going, or do you want to keep going?
Now, when it comes to Metropolis, this was a big movie. I mean, it's almost 2.5 hours long. It is grand scale. It is like one of the groundbreaking science fiction films ever.
Yes. It is the very first movie to use literally smokes and mirrors. That is how a lot of the set design was done through miniatures, and they shoehorned in the actual people running around these miniature sets using mirrors, and they used an actual mirrors to comp in people into the actual sets.
Amazing how much one simple effect could be so effective.
Well, it was one of the very first films to do that, and a later Alfred Hitchcock would actually later see Metropolis and would take inspiration and use those exact same effects in a lot of his films.
I wouldn't be surprised if he used them in Vertigo.
No, some of his earlier works from the 30s and 40s. He was using them in a lot of his earlier works. By the time Vertigo and The Birds came out, much better technology had come out by then.
Well, I guess I can't argue with that. Anyway, let's talk about the cast, because when it comes to the 2 main leads, they definitely... I mean, it's the basic story of love at first sight, but you want to root for them.
It is, and it's also their breakout role for both of them. This was their first breakout film as main leads. But before that, they were just doing minor roles, and that's it. This was their first big movie.
Yeah, but when it comes to their chemistry, it may be simple, but it's still very effective.
Extremely effective.
And when it comes to the woman played by Bridget Helm, she's basically like a leader of a group of people that are believing that there's going to be a matriarch that'll be able to bring the clashing social classes together.
Yes, a mediator, as it was said.
Yeah, sort of like a messiah.
Yes.
I mean, this movie definitely has some very big biblical symbolism in it.
Very big. You see a lot of symbolism dedicated to the 7 deadly sins, especially.
The Tower of Babel.
Tower of Babel. And even featuring some demonic figures in some parts of the film.
Yeah, and the symbolism is great.
It's very great. It's very basic, too. It's easy to illustrate.
And then you have the guy who plays the son, the father of the son. He's the top guy in the city
Yes.
of Metropolis. Everyone is under his thumb, and one little mistake, and you could find yourself below ground, work with the other workers, doing manual labor for 10 hours straight without, and up being on the verge of basically dying of exhaustion.
Yes, and I think the movie really illustrates the underground very well, but it also illustrates kind of the struggles of the elite as well, because you can see throughout the film that, you know, this elitist does struggle to come to terms with certain things, like having to deal with the uproar of the underground, and also having to deal with his son being a bit more of a rebellious type.
And then you have what is considered one of the very first mad scientists in movie history.
Oh, not just that, but takes from the greats of H.G. Wells and Mary Shelley.
Well, yeah, I mean, this guy could basically be Dr. Frankenstein's cousin, for all I know.
Literally, that was the comparison used from back in the day. The contemporaries of the time actually did draw a lot of parallels to Frankenstein and their monster.
I mean, when it comes to the creation he makes, the robot, I gotta say, it still looks really cool after almost 100 years.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, the story of how that robot was manufactured. It was using very, very primitive technology. It was using brand new material called wood filler. I kid you not, the whole thing was sculpted out of plastic wood filler, because it still looked metallic on camera, but it was just barely malleable enough for movement.
Yeah. Now, if it looks a little too similar to, it looks too recognizable, that's because that robot was basically the inspiration for C-3PO in Star Wars.
Yes, yes. You know, and it is literally the first robot. In fact, the German translation literally translates to machine man. There is like a really long word for it, of course, it being German, and it literally translates directly to machine man.
Yeah, and when it comes to the robot, she ends up under the disguise of the woman played by Bridget Helm, who also plays the robot disguise. And I gotta admit, when it comes to the actress, she did a great job of playing two completely different actresses' characters, besides being the same person. One is very moralic and very inspirational, while the other is just wanting to spread chaos everywhere she goes.
Sinful is the word that I would use, because again, a lot of parallels drawn to the seven deadly sins with the robot, and also,
that dance that she does, it is, forgive me for saying this, but it is so erotic.
it is. Well, it's meant to be. You know, that is the symbolism for lust, of course.
Yeah, and then there's also like when it comes to, since this is a German film, they had this sort of genre called German Expressionism.
Yes.
And it was used for a lot of big movies. A good example would be from a few years earlier before this, the horror movie The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Yeah, and you going to the German thing as well, is it's of course overly engineered and complex in terms of the film, because if you look at the modern interviews for the actors and actresses, it was brutal. The filming was absolutely brutal for everybody involved, except the children that was used. The 500 malnourished children, those are actual real children that were in poverty. And they were the only ones that were getting the red carpet treatment, because they were all fed 4 square meals a day. They were all given a bunch of toys and everything to play with.
Yeah.
They were the only ones that were treated well, where everybody else was struggling.
And not only is this German Expressionism, but it just screams Art Deco. Because it is Art Deco all over the place with the skyscrapers and the interior sets and all that stuff.
Oh yeah, and even the underground screams Art Deco industrialism. You know, a lot of the mechanical moving parts and machinery. If you ever go to the local Rock River Threshery, there is actual like period correct machinery from the 1920s, and you can get a very similar vibe of mechanical moving parts that screams danger and power.
Yeah, and the special effects, my God. If they had the Oscar for visual effects, this would have deserved it.
This predates the Oscar.
I know, and I'm just saying.
This predates a lot of things, actually. There's a lot of things that were illustrated in this movie that it predates by, in some cases, nearly a century. One scene that stands out to me is the video conference call.
Oh yeah.
At the end of near the end of the movie, between the foreman and the industrialite, they're doing a video call, before television was even invented. This is, television was still in the patent, still in patents. Only like maybe a dozen people worldwide had the idea of video transmission. And here they are demonstrating it in Metropolis nearly a century before almost a century before it's commonplace.
Yeah.
So very, very forward-thinking movie at the time.
Yeah. My God, this movie is a work of art.
It really is.
It's one of the most amazing films I've ever seen.
Yeah, and there's a lot of really good symbolism and a lot of, very simple things that really make you connect with the film.
Especially when it comes to the whole moral that is repeated throughout the movie. The mediator between the hands and the head must be the heart.
Yeah, not only that, but also it demonstrates how grueling industrial work was, especially at the opening of the movie, where you have the scene of all the people walking into the elevator and walking out. Walking into the elevator, you have these people in jumpers, very contemporary dress, even now. That's very common even in modern industry now, people wearing one-piece jumpers. But they're all sombering in unison a little bit faster than the people exiting the elevator. And the people exiting the elevator are much dirtier and much slumped down a little lower and a slower pace, really driving home how grueling those 10 hours are.
Yeah.
And especially when they're working on the machines with the large, exaggerated movements.
Yeah, but even the son has to experience it himself, and he is on the point of exhaustion too.
Not only that, but even proclaims, Father, how long is 10 hours gonna last? And it really drives home just how grueling that work was and how fed up the lower class was.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to like the commentary itself, I found out that this was actually very popular with the Nazi Party.
Oh yeah. This is, the eve of Third Reich in Germany. This is during the transit. This is during the, the period of Germany just before,
Hitler took control.
Not only Hitler taking control, but the economy tanking really hard.
This was just the Great Depression.
This was 2 years before the Great Depression in Germany. And a thing of that is, like the movie itself was expensive even for back then. It was originally supposed to be 1.5 million francs, and then ended up being almost 4 million francs, nearly tripling the budget.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And somehow it wasn't a big success at the box office either.
No,
and critics didn't like it. Even the author H.G. Wells, the guy who wrote The War of the Worlds, he thought it was one of the silliest things he ever saw.
Yeah, but even so, every single sci-fi movie after that, literally every single one of them has drawn some inspiration from Metropolis, whether it be the camera work with the camera on a swing, because that was one of the first movies to ever do that, whether it be some of the POV shots that they did, very early POV shots, and very difficult to do. Some of the camera work that was done was the first to do that.
Yeah, this movie was as revolutionary as it could be at that time.
Yeah, literally bleeding edge technology, about as bleeding edge as it comes. 18 months for it to film. It took 1.5 years to film the whole thing. At a time when most movies were filmed in under 2 months, sometimes even a month and a half.
Now, when it comes to if you notice in some scenes, a lot of it is very grained and aged. That's because a lot of the footage was lost for almost a century. Until apparently they found a lot of lost footage in Argentina.
Yeah, which is very common. A lot of historical German artifacts did go over to Argentina at the fall of World War II. A lot of German elitists that were part of the Third Reich packed their bags and literally packed everything and took with them to Argentina. That was one of the safe havens.
Yeah. So in 2010, a lot of film enthusiasts were able to almost completely restore the movie to its original length.
Yeah, and that's not to say there aren't earlier versions of the complete film that are, some arguably better. Like I've got an old VHS copy of it, but it's missing some scenes. But the movie is preserved a little bit better because it's closer to the original. Whereas the newer versions are all upscaled in 4K and even colorized, and some people don't like that because some of the scenes are kind of muddled with just all the post-processing that was done to it.
Yeah, I just stick with the original black and white.
If you can find it.
Yeah, there are so many. It's in the public domain, so you can watch it for yourself on YouTube.
You can watch it for yourself on YouTube. You can go to your public library and get a physical copy if you don't have good internet connection. It's a super accessible film.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and like he said, it is one of the most influential films of science fiction.
It is. Even to this day, there's still replicas of the robot that are still occasionally used.
And like I said, it was the influence for C-3PO in Star Wars.
And a lot of the film techniques, Alfred Hitchcock and other thriller and sci-fi directors would take from the same pages as Metropolis. Even some of the shared plot points are used in movies and TV shows like Arcane, based on League of Legends with Piltover and Zone.
Apparently, I found out that when it comes to DC Comics, they did like a Superman version of Metropolis.
Like I said, it's lots of stuff takes inspiration from Metropolis. We could talk
Yeah,
about
with
this for hours.
with Lex Luthor taking the place of the evil scientist.
Yes. That being said, we're going on a little long here. What would you rate the movie?
I'm giving it a solid 5 because this has to be one of the most. This has got to be a masterpiece. It's one of those movies you have got to see before you die.
It is. Yeah, I wouldn't give it that high of a rating. I'd give it 4.5, but I'm only giving it 4.5 because of the grain of the film. Because it's a silent film, and silent films can be a bit hard to watch for some people. Some people don't want to watch silent films. They just want to avoid them altogether.
Well, it takes patience.
It does.
And
take
I had the
patience.
patience to watch it. That's why I'm giving it a solid 5.
Yep. I'm just giving it 4.5 because it is a primitive film. It is an older film. It does take a certain kind of individual to watch it.
Yeah.
Which I think most people should. I think it's a very accessible film and a very easy film to watch. It's one of the easier silent films to watch, actually.
So that was Metropolis. Now we're going 30 years ahead to the 1950s, and this features one of the most iconic robots in pop culture. This movie, Forbidden Planet.
Yes, one of the most iconic early sci-fi films of the early 1950s.
Yeah. A bunch of astronauts end up on a distant planet where they find a man and his daughter stranded, the last survivors of a group that went there beforehand. Along with that is their robot servant named Robbie. Now they find out that there is like a mysterious monster that's causing chaos on the planet, and they have to figure out what it is.
Yes, the id monster, as it's later to be discovered.
Now this film, I really enjoyed it.
It's got a lot of really cool elements to it that I really appreciate.
Yeah, this even has Leslie Nielsen as the main guy. And this was like over 20 years before Airplane.
Oh yeah, like it's one of the more iconic films because you have a pretty good stellar cast. You've got really good special effects, but I would argue that out of all the movies we're discussing today, this one aged the poorest.
Well, I guess I can't argue with that.
It aged the poorest, but only because they made some predictions that technically weren't true. Like one of the first things that's said in the film movie is, "Oh, by the end of the 21st century, man would finally land on the moon."
Cue 1969.
This was before space race. This was just on the eve of the atomic age. The Russians had just discovered the nuclear bomb just a couple years prior. I think this movie came out during the Korean War.
I think it was after the Korean War.
53?
56.
Oh, 56. Oh, okay.
Anyway, let's talk about the main cast. You have Leslie Nielsen as the captain of the crew, and he is very professional.
Very professional, very straight to the point. Definitely keeps his men in line at the presence of a single girl.
Yes, who happens to be the only girl in the entire movie.
Yes.
And then you have her father, played by Walter Pidgeon.
A true veterinary actor and a true
in
his own right.
He'd already been nominated for a few Oscars, including Best Actor for the 1942 Best Picture winner, Mrs. Miniver.
Yes, and definitely plays the role of like the eccentric, I'd say, really well. Definitely the kind of person that you wouldn't want to mess with. I would say a gentleman's eccentric would what I would be to describe his character.
And you can tell that how much he loves his daughter. They're the only two people on that entire planet, so they're practically stranded.
They are, but almost by choice, because one of the first interactions in the movie is, leave now. This is, be gone. We don't need your help. We don't need anybody.
Yeah. And then you have what is perhaps one of the most iconic robots in movie history.
Oh,
Robbie.
Robbie the Robot. Over $250,000 was spent to produce Robbie the Robot.
And nowadays, you can just tell it's a guy in a suit.
Oh yeah, but Robbie the Robot would continue to be used. You know, that suit would continue to be used for decades. Even in his movies as recent as Gremlins, he had a cameo appearance in Gremlins.
And along with other movies too. Heck, a year later after this, they even had a whole movie that starred Robbie the Robot called The Invisible Boy.
And not only that, but he was featured multiple times in both The Outer Limits and Twilight Zone.
And other TV shows like Lost in Space, The Addams Family.
You know, it is literally one of the most famous robots in cinematic history.
And this was 20 years before R2-D2 and C-3PO took the spotlight.
Yeah, and even then, like, even when R2-D2 and C-3PO took the spotlight, he was still hanging out. He was still, like, hanging out in modern movies, all the way through the 80s.
Even into the 2000s, because he had a cameo in the movie Looney Tunes Back in Action.
Yep. And, you know, and the suit is still very much preserved. It's broken down a couple of times because there are some mechanical and electrical moving parts. But they, studios still have them. It is still a suit that can be used to this day.
And when it comes to the character itself, you can't.
You can't not like him. You know, he's a very likable character.
You can tell how loyal he is to his masters.
To his masters, even as going as far as making the largest pile of booze in cinematic history. I will argue that is the most amount of bottles of whiskey I've ever seen in film. 60 gallons worth.
Along with that, he also goes along with that law of principles from...
Yes, one of the very first movies to talk about principles of, like the core principles of Raws. iRobot popularized these rules, but one of the rules, of course, being...
Isaac Asimov, if I recall.
Isaac Asimov wrote these rules, but one of the rules, of course, that was illustrated in this movie a couple of times is don't kill humans.
Yeah, if only they show that in other movies.
Well, we'll get to that.
Let's talk about the production, because they wanted this to be as sci-fi as possible. I mean, you have a completely different world. You have special effects all over the place.
Yeah, one of the cool things that was used was cyclorama, which was used as kind of a panoramic thing for like movies and sometimes sideshow attractions. But cyclorama was actually used in this case for the interior shots of the spaceship.
Yeah.
Which was something that was very, very modern and very new at the time. That was a really cool technology and technique that was very popular back then.
And then you have the special effects used for the monster.
Done by a Disney animator, Joshua Meador. Meador, is it?
I think so.
Yeah. On loan from Disney. One of the, you could definitely get some Disney animation elements from it. That technique predated Dick Van Dyke's movie.
Mary Poppins.
Mary Poppins. So you have actual Disney style animation being done on
an MGM
film.
movie.
And an MGM movie, no less. Yeah. So.
And it still holds up to this day.
Oh, it's so good. That this sparkle and red outline just is so good. Even now, it's still good.
And I don't want to get into spoilers, but when it comes to the monster itself, it's courtesy of a Fordian excuse.
It is. I believe that there was some. I think there was some inspiration drawn from it.
Yeah, and you also have all those shots of like the under the planet where you have like all those endless miles of
desert, courtesy of the Mojave Desert.
Yeah, and then you have the inside of the planet where you have all those different hallways and chasms.
And a lot of that set was reused multiple times in Twilight Zone as well. Like another point of it being a lot of the set design was reused in the Twilight Zone because it was just so good.
Yeah.
And so expensive that a lot of studios and production companies wanted to keep reusing it and keep milking it.
Yeah.
Even the music. This was the very first movie to ever have a fully synthesized soundtrack.
Oh yeah, that's right. And this was decades before people were using it for music in like the 70s and 80s.
No, this was a full decade. This was almost a full decade before Robert Moog invented the synthesizer, and here it is. Custom-made electronic hardware producing music electronically. It's the very first movie to ever do that.
Yeah, and it's
And
really interesting.
We're excluding the theremin, though. There are other films that are older and TV shows that are older that use the theremin, but the theremin was also been around since the 30s.
Yeah, well, along with that, let's talk about the girl in
Yes.
this movie. I mean, like I said, she's the only girl in the entire movie, but she basically plays the innocent.
Well, I wouldn't say the innocent. Naive is the word that's used.
Yeah, I can agree to that.
Naive is the word that is literally used in the ignorant and naive is the film. It was the two adjectives.
I
But
mean,
she's very smart.
That is true, but next you know, she's starting to fall for Leslie Nielsen, and they just met.
Yep. Well, have you ever been alone on the planet for 20 years? I'm just saying.
Yeah, and along that, she's sort of like a princess too, because she has animals that are her friends.
Yeah, definitely a Disney-style princess in a lot of different ways. But definitely plays the character very, very well. It's a very well-written character. It's definitely, socially ignorant, but picks up pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And, and not only that, even towards the end of the film, is, almost more socially accepted than, her own father in some cases.
Yeah. Along with that, there's also let me think. Oh yeah, there's the guy that was with Robbie and the Booze.
Robbie and the Booze. That's the name of our new pop rock band. It's Robbie and the Booze.
Yeah.
Anybody wants to use that, that'd be about, I get 5% royalties.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to the whole story itself, a lot of people have compared it to William Shakespeare's play The Tempest.
No kidding.
Yeah, I mean, it's the whole idea of a bunch of people on a distant land. They meet a guy and his daughter.
Yeah.
There's this servant that's not much of a monster, but he's...
Omnipresent.
Yeah.
And I could definitely see a lot of parallels being drawn to that.
Yeah.
However, I do say that some of the plot points have aged a little poorly. And when I mean by poorly, I don't mean, it still holds up, but it's a plot point that's been used over and over again. Like, we talked about some of the movies that Robbie the Robot was featured in and some of the TV shows he was featured in. A lot of those TV shows and movies shared similar plot points to Forbidden Planet.
Yeah. But when it comes to Forbidden Planet itself,
It's the original.
It was a hit at the box office, if I recall.
Yes, it was.
It even earned an Oscar nomination for visual effects. It lost to Cecil B. DeMille's The Ten Commandments.
Of course. But again, Cecil B. We've mentioned Cecil B. DeMille literally sparing no expense at all. Literally willing to dry a lake over a movie.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to Robbie the Robot, like I said, he's one of the most iconic robots that you can think of when it comes to pop culture.
Yes. Even to this day, I think he still holds up, and a lot of film experts and film analysis are still going to point to Robbie as one of the greats. That being said, what do you rank the movie?
I'm giving it 4 out of 5.
I think I'll agree. I'll kind of agree. I'm going to do the same thing as I did last time and deduct half a point, mainly because the movie is a little bit older, and it is. There are some plot points in the movie that I think have aged poorer than others, like the prediction that mankind's going to explore the planets in about 200 years. Right, we're projected to land on Mars and walk on Mars in a couple of years. So at the time of filming.
Yeah, and we still have to get back to the moon in my book.
Well, we've already been to the moon multiple times, and we're going to be.
Yeah, well, we haven't been up there in over 50 years.
Yeah, money, but that's politics. Yeah. All right.
So that was Forbidden Planet. Now we're going ahead to 1973 with another film from the same guy who ended up creating one of the most iconic stories of the 1990s, Jurassic Park.
Yes, of course, we are talking about Westworld,
Written and directed by Michael Crichton. Now, in the near future, an amusement park is created for adults that is separated into 3 different worlds: Roman world, medieval world, and Westworld. 2 friends find themselves in Westworld. Unfortunately, anything that can go wrong can go wrong. Next thing you know, the robots are starting to act. There are robots all over pretending to be characters, but then they start going haywire, and one of them is a gunslinger that's basically out to get them.
Yes. I'd say that this shares a lot of plot points with some the disaster film genre that we discussed last week. But I also think that there's a lot of plot points that can be shared with Terminator.
Yeah, and not just that, but Jurassic Park as well, considering this was the same guy.
Yes. So a lot of definitely shared elements between those kind of films. Westworld's probably the weakest of the 4 films we're talking about, I'd say.
Yeah.
But I'd also argue that this is the one that has the most violent robots. Because when selecting the 4 films, I wanted to select a film that had violence, not violence per se, but violent robots that go haywire. And there's a few movies that come to mind, but Terminator was too on the nose. That's a whole can of worms that almost needs its own episode, and it's a little bit more of a too new a film franchise.
Yeah.
And then other older films just really didn't hit as hard as Westworld did, because Westworld was a good movie by no stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, I mean, it's not bad, but it could have been much better in my book.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, there's this whole amusement park. There's these human-like robots that you can almost, you can basically tell that they're people pretending to be robots, but
Right.
I wish they could have had more emphasis on the fact that they're just robots.
I disagree. I think they did a fairly good job, driving home the point that they were robots. I think, on a surface level, they looked like human, but that was almost the point now, wasn't it? Making sure that androids were as realistic as possible. In fact, there's even a modern parallel that can be drawn that was mentioned in the film, the hands. And the reason there's a modern parallel is if anybody's into the artificial intelligent art scene, like the AI art scene, one of the key giveaways of a piece of artwork being AI generated is the hands. Just like in Westworld with the androids, one of the dead giveaways that's an android is the hands, which I thought was a very interesting modern parallel to draw from. And, there are some scenes in the movie that kind of help you to disassociate a lot with these androids. One, of course, is the scene where they're doing maintenance on the robots. And then, of course, another scene that really kind of drives home is the scene where you get a POV of the gunslinger, which, fun fact, is the very first time that ever in any movie or TV show that you get digital image processing.
Yeah, the gunslinger, played by the legendary actor Yul Brynner.
Yes, and Yul Brynner did a fantastic job because cold, stone-faced killer the whole time, very few lines.
And his whole character, he was basically influenced by, it was basically an inspiration from a movie that he did about 10 years earlier. He played a cowboy in The Magnificent Seven.
Yeah, the same costume sets were used even.
Yeah, and then you have the 2 guys that play the friends visiting, Richard Benjamin and Josh Brolin.
Mm-hmm. And I'd say that the chemistry between the two is kind of weak at first. Of course, the 2 characters, Peter and John, as we get to know them later in the film. Peter is a first-time goer, and he's asking a lot of the same questions over and over again. Is this a machine? Is this a robot? And then John's like, oh, this is my. I've been here before. I've done all these things.
Yeah,
He's almost his guard's almost set too low.
Yeah, unlike Jurassic Park, this place has already been open for a while. People can go there for $1,000 a day,
which was insane. Well, actually, no. Disney charges similar prices now. It's satire.
Well, and other than that, it's not until and then there's the guy that's in charge of the whole park. You can tell that he's starting to realize that something's going wrong.
Yeah, about halfway through the film, he realizes that he debates with the board. Hey, we should probably shut things down for a month or 2 just to make sure. They're like, yeah, but we agree. Let's not letting new guests in. Let's just make sure that the old guests run their course first, and then we can address everything. Which, of course, by then it was too late.
Yeah, when it comes to the robots, they basically become
monsters.
Yeah.
Like straight up monsters, just like in Terminator.
Yeah, when it comes to Yul Brynner himself, he's basically like the Western version of the Terminator during the last third of the movie. And my God, I thought
it was menacing.
Yeah.
Very, very menacing. And of course, again, a lot of digital post-processing used. First time it was ever done. But going back to why the movie is a little bit weak is because it's because of the studio, MGM. Back then, MGM had a bit of a reputation for kind of treating their directors and screenwriters kind of poorly. Interjecting with their own, plot points and additions and edits. In fact, in the pre-production phase of the movie, the final script wasn't done until less than 24 hours before the film began filming. And even the actors and actresses weren't selected until less than 48 hours. And the director and screenwriter didn't have any say on who the actors and actresses were going to be. They had no clue until literally a day or two prior.
No kidding.
Yeah, it was a nightmare. In fact, at the end of the filming, the director was almost borderline disgusted with how long and boring the movie was. And even during the filming, he was like, let's just cut straight to the choice. Let's just film exactly what we need to film to get this out the door. No more, no less. And even then, at the end, they had to make a lot of edits just to make the film somewhat interesting, which is why it fell so flat with a lot of people.
Yeah, this is my first time seeing it, and I was expecting it to be a little more intense.
Yeah.
I was expecting it to be more like Jurassic Park.
Yeah, but again, that's all on MGM's side. If you read into it, MGM was actually, again, building reputation with having a lot of movies that were pretty hit and miss and pretty mediocre at best.
And also this was around the time when, James Bond was starting to...
Right.
This was around the time when Sean Connery was stopped being James Bond and Roger Moore would take his place.
Yeah, which a lot of people to this day will argue that Sean Connery not being James Bond anymore, not a choice that anybody would have gone through with.
Yeah, but still...
So yeah, MGM was going through some tough times. Well, not tough times; they were still doing pretty well, but
yeah. Well, when it comes to the whole production value, I do say they do a good job of bringing that whole Western world to life.
100%. They did a really, really good job because that was the point of it, wasn't it?
You have full sets. You have guys and girls in old Western themed costumes.
Bringing in some of the old Western sets from other movies too, and also going into the Mojave Desert as well.
And even using Western style music as well.
Oh yeah, they did a good job giving the old Western style feel.
Even one of the guys in charge of the park even said, "We're going to spare no expense," just like John Hammond in Jurassic Park.
And then even in the scenes where you see all the computers and the sci-fi stuff, they did a really good job of that too. Again, it did a really good job illustrating the disassociation between man and machine.
Yeah, well, in my opinion, I think the special effects could have been better. But when it comes to the whole POV thing, like you mentioned, like you said, that was groundbreaking.
It was very groundbreaking, and it was the very first time that it was ever done. I believe for the 2.5 minutes that they used, I think it cost them something like $200,000 a second or some really obscene number like that, because they were using university lab equipment and they were using top of the line hardware, and they had to pull strings, and people had to pull strings to make it happen.
Yeah.
Strings were pulled from research firms to do that.
Yeah. When it comes to the movie in general, like I said, it was a financial success at the box office.
Yes.
It did also get a sequel a few years later called Future World.
Yes.
But that didn't get a lot of love.
No, it did not.
But this movie was the inspiration for the now popular HBO show of Westworld.
Yes. In fact, when I was trying to find the movie, I had a hard time finding it because of the TV show. In fact, the TV show is actually doing better than the movie.
It's already earned a lot of Emmys.
Yes. So it does have significant place in cinematic history.
Yeah, but when it comes to Yul Brynner, when it comes to Yul Brynner in general, I've always been used to him as the King of Siam in The King and I, and that's the movie that earned him an Oscar. Mm-hmm. That was basically the role he did that on Broadway for so many decades until he died. Mm-hmm. It was just so weird seeing him as a robot cowboy.
Yeah, but he did a good job of it.
I'll give him credit for that. I think he was the only good thing in the movie.
I agree. I think that was probably I think that and the role of John were the two best choices for the film, because John's he's the sheriff, he's the guy that's been there before, and he does play the role of a typical Western cowboy kind of well. But I'd say he did a okay job.
When it comes to Richard Benjamin, like I said, he's basically the new guy. He's just trying to take it one step at a time.
Oh yeah, and honestly, it shows. I didn't care for that character. That being said, what would you rate the movie?
Well, I'm not going to quite give it a. I'm only going to give it like 3. I'm not quite 3.5, more like 3.25.
I'm giving a 3, like a solid 3. There are some really cool elements in the movie that I really appreciate, like the special effects, because that's kind of my thing, and also the disassociation of the androids. But that's like the only thing I like about the movie. It doesn't even have a good ending. Like there is no like conclusive ending to the movie.
Yeah, I can agree to that.
So,
and this was the same guy that made Jurassic Park.
Yeah, it's just MGM was being too heavy, putting their thumb on the scale a bit too heavy with the production value, and then the pre-production value of the movie. So,
well, all in all, I think I can just say that when it comes to this movie, I think it was basically the backbone for him writing Jurassic Park.
It is, yeah, but it does have a cult following, so there's that.
Yeah.
There is a cult following for Westworld.
And like I said, there is always the popular HBO show.
Yes, which follows very similar plot points.
So that was Westworld. Now for our final film, we're going ahead to 1986 with another robot that's been popular in pop culture. The movie, Short Circuit. A robot is struck by lightning and finds itself having sentience. It ends up on the run from the army and finds up gaining a friendship with a girl. Meanwhile, there's a bunch of guys that are going after it who don't even realize that it has a will of its own now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, the girl being Stephanie, being played by
Alan Steedy.
Alan Steedy, and then of course
You may recognize her from The Breakfast Club as the basket case.
yes, and of course the two lead roles, two male protagonist roles, being one of them being played by Guttenberg, and then I forget the name of the other
Fisher
guy.
Stevens.
Fisher Stevens. So Guttenberg and Stevens are also featured in the movie as
The two guys that are
Mhm.
after the robot.
Mhm.
Now, this was my first time seeing it, and I thought it was a lot of fun.
So a little anecdote about this movie for me was that it's a lot of fun, I agree, but I haven't seen the movie in almost a decade. But it was the very, very first DVD I had ever purchased with my own money. And I purchased it in like 2004 for like $5 at my local Blockbuster in this crummy cardboard sleeve. I still have the disc, but I don't have the cardboard sleeve because cardboard sleeves do what cardboard sleeves do and disintegrate. But I remember watching it dozens of times and just being wowed at how modern the movie felt, even in the mid-2000s, despite the fact that it's a movie from the mid-80s.
Yeah. And now when it comes to the director of the movie, he'd already done another science fiction movie a few years earlier, the thriller War Games with Matthew Broderick.
Another, one of my favorite sci-fi movies of all time.
Yeah. Now when it comes to the cast in Short Circuit, they did a good job.
A very good job. Not exact, because the Short Circuit really isn't meant to be a serious film. It's almost a comedy of sorts.
It's basically a comedy.
It's basically a comedy, but not the kind of slapstick comedy from the 80s like Tin Cup or anything like that where it's kind of an eye roller. No, it's got some really, really good lines, some really good jokes and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, you have Alan Steedy as the girl she just ended an abusive relationship with her ex-boyfriend.
Yep.
She's in charge of a bunch of animals.
And runs a food truck, so.
And then she finds the robot and she thinks it's an alien.
Thinks it's an alien, and then, of course, number 5 just goes, input. And so she's like, okay, TV, books, go.
And then you have Gutenberg as the guy that made the robot.
Yeah, and also his companion as well.
We'll save him for later.
Oh, yeah.
Let's talk about the robot, number 5, because I gotta say, it's one of the coolest robots I've ever seen in a movie.
It's also no mechanical moving parts. It's a puppet.
Yes, that's right. The guy who voiced the robot was also a puppeteer. He even worked with the Muppets.
Yeah, and even the guy who designed the robot, Sid Mead, he also did work in Blade Runner and Tron to design number 5. So definitely has some strong. So even the design of number 5 and Johnny 5 as as it's later known in the sequels. Just the people that were behind it to make that robot a reality also had some strong accolades.
And I give the movie credit for making this robot seem so alive because my God,
Yes.
it's got to be one of the most expressive robots I've ever seen.
Very expressive.
And apparently it was also an influence for another iconic movie robot, Disney Pixar's Wall-E.
Oh yeah, you know, and you can definitely see the parallels between both robots, especially with the tire tracks.
Yeah.
With the caterpillar tracks on both robots.
As well as the eye visors as well.
Oh yeah, very, very, very much alive. And you know, some of the most iconic insults and lines of cinematic history, at least in my opinion. I still use some of the insults in regular talk to this day. I won't repeat them because they're a little graphic, but
Yeah, well, when it comes to the robot, my God, the puppeteering is just perfect.
you wouldn't know it's a puppet. You wouldn't.
To me, it's up there with Audrey 2 from Little Shop of Horrors.
Yeah, it's like, it's that good. Like, again, even in the mid-2000s when I was watching it the first time as a little kid, it felt like a robot that was going to be in the near future. And it turned out it was going to be as well, because, you know, Boston Robotics would end up making a similar, well, not a similar robot, but a robot with similar intent. You know, the Boston Robotic dog robot thing.
Yeah.
That is used as a mule pack in the military. It would be developed less than 10 or 15 years later.
Yeah.
So,
And when it comes to the comedy, too, I mean, it's really good.
very good lines. Again, some of the best lines ever. I still use those insults.
And then, I also love, like, the conversations that the guys in the guys at the laboratory have.
Oh yeah. Would you like to be a pepper too?
And then
it's one of the reasons I still drink Dr. Pepper is because of that line.
Yeah, well, you also have the guy that was in charge of the whole program.
Oh yeah.
And then you have that guy that's basically wanting to go out and chase down and take down that robot.
Yep. You know, and just waste millions of government dollars to do it too.
But then there is a controversy in this that nowadays people would really be cringing towards it. I'm talking about Fisher Stevens, a white Jewish guy playing a guy from India. Complete with a thick accent.
I can interject and actually talk about this a little bit, because I actually did read up on this controversy a little bit. It's basically the very similar controversy that Robert Downey Jr. experienced a few years ago, because he did a blackface as well
in Tropic Thunder.
In Tropic Thunder.
And that movie earned him an Oscar nomination.
It did. But it turns out that, like, even Fisher Stevens was, you know, he was okay with it. Like, it was more common in the 80s and more accepted in the 80s. But everyone that was involved in the making of that film agrees that if they were to redo it again today, they would do it differently. They would do that role differently and just hire a Bollywood actor more than most likely.
I mean, when it comes to, like, the whole... I mean, this guy is straight up as stereotypical as Apu in The Simpsons.
He is. He does a really good job of it. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I didn't even know... Like, I'm horrible with names and actors. I did not know Fisher Stevens was a white Jewish guy until literally he said so. I knew he was white, but I didn't know he was Jewish. And when I read about that controversy, that blew me away, because you wouldn't know. It was done really, really well.
And strangely enough, he becomes the main actor in the sequel.
Yeah. Which is I think it was a straight to VHS sequel, if I'm not mistaken.
It was released in theaters.
It was released in theaters. I don't know why. It's not that good.
I wouldn't recommend the sequel.
I would not recommend the sequel. It is not that good.
Yeah, but still, it's just... Nowadays, I'm pretty sure a lot of people from India would be just...
Yeah, I mean, again, it was a different... I'm not going to use the argument it was a different time, because that's a really, really poor argument to say. But it was, and again, everybody that was involved admits that, yeah, that was kind of in poor taste, and we would do that 100% differently. You know, which begs the question is, I would be really, really interested in seeing a remake of this. Like, this is one of those movies from the 80s that probably would deserve a remake and would benefit from one.
The only thing I would want if it was a remake would be actual puppeteering. No CGI.
I think that you wouldn't just... I think there wouldn't be CGI or puppeteering. I think they would actually just literally get a real robot. I mean, come on, Robot Wars? I mean, you could just literally build a robot on a budget that would do all the things that Johnny Five does.
Yeah, but when it comes to how complex his design is, I mean, my God, that's got to be one of the most complex-looking robots I've seen.
It is. Like, even to this day, it's one of the most complex-looking robots, but if you look at Robot Wars, it's not that far a stretch, actually. It's not that far of a stretch. You could probably build a Johnny Five replica that's fully functional for under 10 grand. I know I'm probably exaggerating. It's probably going to be more expensive than that, but,
Yeah.
you could do it. And you could do it on a, not obscene budget.
Well, when it comes to Short Circuit, I know that it was a financial success at the box office, and it was a big hit on video.
It was a big hit on video, but it only won one award, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't recall what it was for.
I think it was 1987's best film, but it wasn't through the Oscars or anything like that. It was through a lesser award.
I wouldn't know. But anyway, when it comes to just Johnny Five in general, I know that there's this guy in the UK. He built this incredible replica of it lately, and he's been working on it for like the past couple of years, and he's been showing it at like Comic-Cons over there, and my God, it looks so cool.
Yeah.
You can see it on YouTube.
Yeah, it's not even the only replica out there. There are other replicas as well, and the puppet's still around. Like the studio does still have it. You can still they didn't dispose of it and toss it aside. It's one of the few instances where they actually kept everything.
And I mean, if you're a guy into puppeteering, this is a must-watch because the way they do the robot is just incredible. Like I said, it's up there with like Audrey 2 in the movie version of Little Shop of Horrors.
It's also one of the few instances of a movie where you actually end up rooting for the robot.
Just like WALL-E.
Yeah, it's one of the few movies where you can actually relate to the robot more than anything else. It doesn't happen very often in robot films, so that's why I selected it. Is because it's a friendly robot movie. Because it's definitely a different tone than Westworld or even Metropolis.
Even though it's rated PG, I'd say nowadays it'd be rated PG-13 because there's a lot of cussing.
There's a lot of cussing, and there's even a nude scene. In fact, out of every movie we talked about, there's only one movie that doesn't have a nude scene, and it's the one with the most blood, Westworld.
Yeah, well,
Westworld's got the one with the most blood, and it's the only one that doesn't have a nude scene.
Yeah, well, nowadays I'm pretty sure it'd be rated PG-13.
Oh, 100%. All these movies deserve PG-13 ratings or more.
All in all, what would you give this movie?
I'm giving it a 4.5. Once again,
I'm giving it a 4.
Oh, okay.
I liked it. I really did. This was my first time seeing it. I wouldn't say I think it should have had more, but I think it was fine the way it was.
Well, the thing is, if you discount Short Circuit 2, and most people do, it stands on its own as a really, really good film. And even now, I'd say that it holds up better than most. There are some things, nowadays, if you were to watch Short Circuit, the robot and the computers and stuff, they're a little dated, but 15 years ago, you're kind of pushing it a little. But overall, it's still a good movie, and it's still got some really good lines.
Yeah, and like I said, the robot is just incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So that was our take. And so I hope you all have a happy Halloween.
Yeah.
When it comes to our next episode, we're going to be shifting again. We're going to be dealing with 4 movies from the same director who has the most Academy Award wins for Best Director, John Ford. We'll be looking at 4 movies from him. They're all Westerns. A few of them star John Wayne.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this might be some movies you might like.
We'll see. This was my time to try and convince you to start getting into some genres, and I think I succeeded.
Until then, I'm Chris Wyatt.
And I'm Jacob.
And thank you very much for watching Chris's Classic Cinema. Happy Halloween, everyone.
Happy Halloween.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Wyatt for Chris's Classic Cinema, and I just want to let you know that if you love this show, you can continue watching episodes on the YouTube channel, WLOOCA-TV. Or you can also watch them on my YouTube channel, Darth Star Killer 1912. So I hope you are able to watch the episodes because I really want to know how you guys like this movie. Until then, I'm Chris Wyatt, and I hope to see you soon.